There is a Jewish story about a well-respected rabbi. Soon after the death of this great rabbi in the region, a traveler said to one of the great teacher's disciples, "Your rabbi was renowned for his wisdom. What did he give greatest attention to in life?" The disciple thought a minute and said, "To whatever he happened to be doing at the moment." Celebrated wisdom, in other words, was the gift of truly being present, fully attentive to the situation or the person who needed your attention. It is a wisdom, Holy Scripture reminds us, that calls us to know ourselves and to let the moments of our lives, the relations we have, the responsibilities, the joys and sorrows, whatever the day may bring, reveal the spiritual lessons they hold for us, whatever responses may be demanded at the moment, in any given day, at any given time. There is a learned reality as life unfolds. Things happen. Plans get interrupted. We cannot and do not control everything. And in truth, it is often the unanticipated events of our days that teach us most about the connections of life and faith. They provide the lesson plan that invites meaningful reflection and response. No one chooses to receive a diagnosis of cancer. No one chooses to lose a loved one, either unexpectedly or even after a long illness. But those occasions sometimes can provide the opportunities for reflecting on what is truly valuable, what our faith means to us, to others. We hear in the gospel reading this morning just such an event. Jesus was teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. It's one of the first stories we have in that first chapter of Mark's gospel. He was just beginning to be known. And immediately there was a sense that those who listened and heard him were in the presence of someone who was amazing and astonishing, who spoke with an authority and an authenticity very different from the religious leaders they had known. I suspect it isn't because they were not used to competent scribes and rabbis. I would imagine that the religious leaders at Capernaum were well schooled in the law and the tradition. In fact, we have every reason to believe from other passages in the Gospels that the religious leaders were often quite rigid and scrupulous about the details of what was right interpretation and what was wrong. In fact, it wasn't always easy living up to some of their standards. And there is also reason to believe, scattered among the gospel stories, that at times they adjusted standards, not for the common people, but to suit themselves or influential friends. Perhaps that is why Jesus warned about hypocrites and hypocrisy, saying one thing and doing another. When Jesus speaks, as he spoke that day, about the power of God as a liberating power, he also acted in ways that liberated people. That individual who came into the synagogue that morning, interrupting the events that had been planned for the day. And yet Jesus speaks a word of power and healing to liberate a man from the bondage of the spirit that had convulsed and contorted his life. Jesus didn't simply talk the talk. He, as the expression goes, walked the walk. And perhaps that was what made him such an astonishing teacher with an authentic authority, divine, and yet also deeply, deeply human. His teaching was affirmed as new and different, and there's a lot about the event that day. We don't know exactly what he taught, what the content of his teaching was. We simply know that the crowd was stunned and astonished, because here was this common person whom they knew as a peasant woodworker from Nazareth, a carpenter, the son of a carpenter. And people often said, you know, can anything good ever come from that part of town? But this was the best teaching they had ever experienced. There is a real bridge between that experience, that story in Mark's gospel, and the story that forms the base of The Lost Boy, the Epiphany musical theme, which draws its inspiration not from Mark but from Luke, from the one story that is told about Jesus' childhood. I read somewhere that it was common, if you were writing a biography of someone or saying something about their life, that you would include one event from their childhood that in a sense kind of gave a foretelling of an important aspect of that person's adult ministry in life. And in this case, finding Jesus in the temple among the religious leaders when he was only 12, also astounding them with the depth of his understanding and the questions he raised and the conversation which he engaged. Even a 12-year-old stunned the audience. Thomas Aquinas, the Christian writer and philosopher, once told some of his students, "Preach Christ everywhere you go, and if necessary, use words." It is a reminder that we teach not just by what we say, but by the authenticity of that paired with our actions. That our faith is nurtured not just by words, but by what we experience and do, how we are nurtured in the true and deep meanings of the Christian faith. I had the privilege growing up in a very small church in Maine of having what I call sort of authentic witnesses to the Christian faith, those who taught and those who lived out their faith in ways that made a difference. And I saw how their faith shaped their lives, how it helped them when times were tough, how they celebrated when times were great, and how especially they nurtured and passed on stories of the faith and the important values of the faith from one generation to another. Among the staff, we had a conversation this past week, and Dean turned to me, and as we were actually at lunch over at Gaetano's, and he said, "You know, I think Margaret thinks her way to faith. I'm more of a feeling person." Now, I've thought about that, because I don't think of myself as not a feeling person. I think of myself as one who feels deeply